June 23, 1944. In the vast emptiness of the mid-Atlantic Ocean, 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands, Japanese submarine the fortified 52 prepared to surface. On board were 94 crewmen, 2 German technicians, and over 2 tons of gold. Precious cargo bound for Nazi Germany. Commander Uno Kameo had just completed a successful rendezvous with a German U-boat. Everything seemed perfect. But within hours, I-52 would be destroyed by American forces using technology the Japanese didn't even know existed. The sounds of the submarine breaking apart were captured on wire recordings, transmitted by small floating devices called sonobuoys, deployed by American aircraft circling overhead. For the Japanese submarine force, this was more than a tactical loss. It marked the moment their underwater empire began to collapse under the weight of American technological superiority. By the end of the war, U.S. submarines had sunk over 1,300 Japanese ships, more than 5 million tons of shipping, while Japan's submarines managed to sink just 184 Allied vessels. The numbers were shocking, but the true difference lay not in tactics or bravery, but in the tools each side used to fight. While Japan built massive submarines capable of launching planes and sailing around the world, America built systems that could hear them coming from miles away. Japan's submarines were marvels of engineering. The I-400 class was longer than a destroyer, carried floatplane bombers, and could theoretically strike targets as distant as New York. But they were entering a battlefield that had changed fundamentally. America's sonar, radar, acoustic torpedoes, and sonobuoys had turned the ocean into a surveillance grid where nothing could hide. The Japanese submariners, once masters of stealth, were now hunted by invisible forces they couldn't counter. The psychological impact was devastating. Submarine crews reported that American aircraft seemed to appear out of nowhere. Depth charges landed with precision even when the submarines were deep and maneuvering. Homing torpedoes pursued them relentlessly. As Japan focused on attacking Allied warships, American submarines systematically destroyed the merchant fleet that kept Japan's economy alive. By mid-1944, Japan realized that diving to avoid aircraft wasn't enough, because the enemy could now hear them underwater. Sonobuoys, first developed by the British and quickly improved by U.S. engineers, transformed anti-submarine warfare. Aircraft could drop these small sonar units in patterns, creating underwater listening grids that tracked propeller sounds, engine noises, and even the movement of diving planes. The skies and the seas were no longer safe. In June 1945, Operation Barney shocked Japanese command. 9 American submarines equipped with new FM sonar, capable of detecting mines, penetrated the supposedly impregnable sea of Japan. Navigating through minefields with only 50 yards between death and survival, they sank 28 Japanese ships in waters considered untouchable. This wasn't just a military breakthrough, it was a psychological defeat. No waters were safe now, not even home. Japanese submariners, some of the best trained and most disciplined naval officers of the war, began to lose hope. They weren't just being outgunned, they were being outthought, outproduced, and outmaneuvered by a technological system far more advanced than their own. American submarines could detect Japanese vessels from over 20 miles away, operate in coordinated groups, and rely on intelligence from decrypted Japanese communications. Japan never had a chance to match that scale. The American industrial engine ensured that submarines were built faster than they could be sunk. Over 300 U.S. submarines were constructed during the war, while Japan struggled to maintain 70. Spare parts were always available. Repairs were quick. Every American system, fire control computers, sonar, radar, worked reliably. Japanese submarines, despite their brilliant designs, were often delayed, under-equipped, or operating with systems that broke down. Even the torpedoes told the story. America started the war with the flawed Mark 14, but quickly adapted, improved it, and introduced the electric Mark 18 and the homing Mark 24. Japan's torpedoes were reliable but never innovative and never produced in sufficient quantities. American submarines could afford to fire freely. Japanese captains hesitated, knowing resupply was uncertain. The I-52's final moments, recorded in chilling detail, signaled a change in the course of naval warfare. For every surviving Japanese submariner, the message was clear. The war under the sea was lost. Lieutenant Commander Nambu of the Thaisei 401 later said that he realized Japan had lost the war, not during battle, but when he heard how casually and efficiently American forces communicated across vast distances, coordinating strikes with ease, resources in abundance, confidence in every transmission. After the surrender, Japanese crews were brought aboard American submarines. They saw systems they had never imagined. They toured shipyards that ran 24 hours a day. They studied equipment that worked without fail. The gap wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. America had built a war machine that emphasized reliability, standardization, and integration. Japan had built marvels, one at a time, too few, too late, and too vulnerable. In 1946, Japan's most advanced submarines, the I-400 and I-401, were sunk off Hawaii, not in battle, but as target practice. Their destruction wasn't even carefully recorded. America had already moved beyond them. For the Japanese submariners who learned of this, it was a final, crushing confirmation. The ocean had never truly been theirs. But from this defeat came transformation. Post-war Japan rebuilt its industries with new priorities: technological excellence, reliable systems, integrated manufacturing. Veterans from the submarine force took roles in companies like Sony and Toyota. They taught a new generation the hard-earned lesson of the war, that courage and brilliance alone are not enough. In modern warfare, and in modern industry, technology backed by scale, reliability, and speed decides the outcome. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with pride became a domain they would never again dominate. But the lesson they carried home shaped the Japan that rose in the decades that followed, a nation committed not to matching the past, but mastering the future through technology. The story didn't end with surrender. It evolved. As Japan rebuilt, the lessons of its submariners were quietly embedded into the DNA of its industrial resurgence. The young engineers of post-war Japan listened closely to veterans who spoke not only of bravery, but of missed opportunities, of technological arrogance, of how innovation without scale, without integration, was doomed to fail in a modern war. Japanese industry pivoted. Companies like Mitsubishi, Toshiba, and Hitachi began developing technologies not as isolated marvels, but as parts of tightly integrated systems. Quality control, mass production efficiency, and interoperability became sacred principles, not because they were trendy, but because Japan had paid in blood and steel for failing to master them. In the 1960s and 70s, Japan's new maritime self-defense force forged partnerships with its former enemy. Japanese submariners trained on American tactics. They studied American sonar and radar. American and Japanese submarines even operated together during Cold War exercises, watching the same ocean that had once been soaked in the fear of being hunted. Together they built a new undersea doctrine, one informed by hard-won knowledge on both sides. And in a quiet irony, by the 1980s, Japanese submarines had become among the most advanced in the world. Not the largest, not the most imposing, but the most refined, the most precise, the most reliable. Built with the same technological humility and drive for excellence that post-war Japan had embraced in its factories and its schools. For the men who had once been hunted, who had watched their comrades disappear beneath waves they couldn't fight back against, this was vindication, not of their wartime cause, but of their commitment to learn from defeat. Commander Uno Kameo and his crew lie 17,000 feet below the Atlantic. But the sonar recordings of their final moments are preserved in the U.S. National Archives, not as trophies, as history, as a warning. Because the ocean still belongs to those who control the technology to master it, and in war or in peace, that lesson never changes. It's a truth that echoes far beyond submarines and sonar. Whether on the battlefield, in the boardroom, or in the labs where tomorrow's technologies are born, the nations and individuals who thrive are those who adapt, innovate,